Um, yeah, so, right. I think we should just talk about this real quick. We could talk about agency later, maybe, since Francis is going to be here next time, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on, I think. But for those that aren't involved in the project, it's basically, I mean, since we're going to talk about it real quick, I'll just give you like a quick overview. The project, maybe, I think we've sent out a description before, but it's basically we're trying to figure out a way to here it is. Try to figure out a way to consider like perspective as it relates to platforms, kind of. And it's been a little bit vague so far. But basically, I think the issue is like emergent technology, informatics and emergent technology. So it's kind of like trying to consider how different like digital networks create different like emergent relationships in culture. I think is kind of like the broad stroke of what the issue is about. And Tomas, I mean, I think is the special editor. So if you want to give a little context, that would be cool too. But it's basically
Yeah.
we're
Please,
trying to
can you
like
please share the text written by Olivier?
Olivier. Yeah, perfect.
Because
Because that's what I wanted.
like
Right, right,
to give a very quick summary,
right,
we were discussing with Olivier his notion of perspective,
right.
which is I would say inspired, but also is very literal. Because the
Yeah.
notion of perspective, he was telling us that it comes from the painters, from the artists,
Mhm.
basically. That this is a visual perspective. It's a concept that comes when we speak about what we see. It
Mm.
doesn't apply to what we think. But then, according to him, he said that Nietzsche or some like more recent philosophers started to use the notion of perspective as a way of thinking in analogically to what is to see things from different perspectives. They were proposing to look at things from different perspectives, to look at concepts, think from different perspectives. Now perspective is a sort of position in a sort of semantic landscape or reasoning rules landscape or something like that.
Right.
And then he was telling us that this idea kind of passed very silently through the society, and it became a way to exert power and to structure societies in general. Then perspectives are everything for us in the sense that a perspective will define many things that are not said just by saying I have this perspective. These are like, I think it will make sense to call them positions in a reasoning landscape. So you will follow one reasoning path or another reasoning path depending on your perspective. In the same way that light will follow one path or another path depending on where are you looking at. Light you see, it's following one path or another. So reasoning, it's more or less reasoning. I mean thinking. Anyways, and then he was connecting this to the notion of media, or how do we communicate, and to make it quick, he was telling that there is a big distinction between a centralized network, because now we are in the network communication, let's say, era. So everything, all communications flow through networks. In the past, it was more like sequential. It was more like you go to the library, books are there. Still, you can think of a network of libraries, but that wasn't really the main thing. We were interacting with locations. Now everything is interconnected. Everything is in a network. But the networks can have different properties, and we distinguish two of them, basically, centralized and distributed. By centralized, we mean the power of the network is concentrated on one agent, on one institution or whatever. And by decentralized network, we mean like something like blockchain or Wikipedia, or something that has like no boss, let's say. And he was telling that the perspectives with which we communicate and we see and we think will be changed radically by the type of communication media we flow through. And specifically, he wanted to establish distinctions between the communication media established by centralized networks, like such as Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, like social networks in general, and
Mhm.
the decentralized alternative. But the paper is in a very, I will say, primitive state because many claims are disconnected so far, and we are not yet touching or connecting on some other aspects that are of interest of the whole group, such as urban or city concepts and notions, like the ones that Matthew is reflecting a lot about, or that Lyubov even introduced in a previous meeting. So we are now in a phase waiting for Olivier to fix the abstract. I suggested several comments to him to make it more understandable to people that have not read his books or discussed with him extensively. So that's the problem so far of the abstract, is kind of written for someone who thinks like him. It's not yet reaching the general public, uh, let's say, way of explaining.
Yeah.
And then we plan to meet up, hopefully, with Lyubov, Matt, those that couldn't make it the week before, which are those mostly
Mm.
related to urban-like things, and then try to bring this angle in to develop then the article by sections and so on. So I will say we are on track, and I received a message by the editor also, like
Mm.
the day before, 2 days ago, asking for a tentative title and abstract. So we should have it by next week, I hope. So that's the
Yeah.
update on our article.
Nice. Yeah, I was like, I mean, part of the reason I brought it up too is like I think uh we need like to like talk about perspective a little more maybe, and like to connect it to maybe make that connection too. Um and what I emailed about an hour ago um was this suggestion um that yeah, like maybe like really like what are perspectives. Olivier's, I mean, I agree. Like, I think it's really interesting what he says. And I think he's right. But I think it's also interesting to think of like perspectives in some way, just like as a model. Like, in a certain way, a perspective is like a model of the world. Like, you're looking at the world. You're looking at like a slice of the world, or like the world that you're looking at. The perspective that you have is like a part of the world, and that's kind of uh, I'm not too familiar with like a lot of the world building literature, but I think one way to maybe develop it further might be to suggest that perspectives are kind of like dynamic models, or like kind of like living models to some degree. So like something along these lines. And to yeah, somebody want to hop in real quick? Actually, it sounded like no.
No, I was
Okay.
just unmuted.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay. And so when we're looking at different like perspectives as different kinds of models, and of course, like model is typically we kind of think of it in like a fixed kind of way. Like a model is a certain like fixed simplification of something. Um, but if you say a perspective is like a certain model of the world, um, like Uber, for example, has a model of the world in the sense that like it has a perspective of what the world is like because it's like shaped in a certain way. Like that's the world it's a part of, kind of. That's kind of like the main thing I wanted to kind of discuss or like suggest. Um, and that this kind of like world building or this kind of perspective that Uber has, and probably all like socio technical processes or like or certain platforms, um, aren't like they don't have a good perspective basically, or like their world is not. It doesn't fit well into. It's not like a ideal perspective in the way that like in the Renaissance there was that kind of ideal perspective that Olivier brought up, like the perspective or the world that Uber has, the model of the world that it has is not. It creates paradoxes basically, which is that might be one way to consider the link. But yeah, I mean, next week we can discuss it more. I just kind of wanted to bring it up to see if you know how things were looking with that, but we could probably talk about it at the next meeting, which is going to be next Monday. Because yeah, I mean, I was sick last week, so I couldn't make it unfortunately, but I think that might be an interesting way to kind of bridge the two concepts. Yeah, and I mean, I would also just like raise the question to anybody here, like generally speaking, like do all socio-technical processes, or even just like Uber or like any specific platform, like do they have a perspective? Like, do they have a model of the world? And how do we think of Uber, for example, as having like a model of the world? How does it kind of, and even like, I mean, to consider any computer program really, like Jonathan, you might even have something interesting to say about this too, but like the rules of the computer or like the algorithms of the computer to some degree are like are a perspective. Like they are a model of the world in the sense that these rules are kind of the rules that are like part of the computer is a perspective on how the world works and how to operate in a particular kind of world. If that makes sense. So I would really kind of just food to chew on for anybody right there. Might be a good way to develop the paper, might not, but I just was thinking of that today. And would I don't know, would consider that as maybe a way to get the paper moving forward. Yeah. So I don't know. We can wait till next Monday. Should we? Anybody want to talk about that at all, or should we move on to agency and other stuff? Because I'm fine with either, really. Yeah, Marcus.
I just have a question about the Uber perspective. Like,
Yeah.
What do you exactly mean? Or in my mind comes there are multiple perspectives. I mean, there's probably the technological mapping of the world, the infrastructure. Then there's the business model perspective. Then there's the social interaction between the servers. I mean, is it one perspective? And what are you referring to?
Yeah, I mean that's a great point actually. Like even one company has many perspectives, because like what is a perspective? I mean you're having a perspective of some process, I guess. Like it's like your customer base. You have a perspective of your business model. I get like of the certain businesses. You have a perspective of like the geographic landscape, I guess. Other perspectives too, and maybe like all these perspectives come together in some way might be one way to put it. But that is a good point. I think like the big challenge is really trying to consider how and to what degree any socio-technical process has a perspective. Like how do you make sense of those kind of two? How do you like marry those two terms together? Because it's it's difficult because I mean I don't even know like what a perspective is, or I don't know how Olivier really defines a perspective generally. It's such like a broad term, so it's it's I think it's like a open-ended question that I'm not really sure how to fully wrap my head around. If anyone else is.
Matthew, can I ask what is the point of the paper? I don't understand it yet. So it's about perspective and socio-technical processes. Is this the core, what it should be about, or?
Well, I mean, Tomas kind of summed it up well, and we're still in the beginning stages, I think.
Yeah.
So
Let me say a little bit because I think it can be summarized. It's a very nice question to talk to define what is the article about, really, because I don't think I think Olivier is the only one who has a clue about it, a full clue, but we are not very yet able to entirely communicate because different terminologies and different perspectives. Let's say. No, I'm just kidding. But the point is how, let's say that we have the definition of perspective so far, just to make the point. Having a definition of perspective, then the question is how these perspectives become influenced by the communication media in which we work on, or we do our actions on. And the two main groups, the two main competitors in this comparison are centralized networks versus decentralized networks.
Okay.
So the idea, for example, normatively speaking, I think a perspective is something like a normative idea about what things are and how.
I think you might be muted, Tomas.
Yeah, I cannot hear.
The okay.
Going. So the idea is like the hidden power of the communication media in how
We lost
perspectives become
Sorry, Thomas,
structured.
we lost you.
Thomas. We
Yeah.
lost you for a bit.
3 minutes.
Now, am I back?
Yeah, you're good now.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, I was again in
Okay, can you repeat because we couldn't hear.
Yeah. How perspectives become influenced by the communication media. So, because perspectives if we define them, we might be missing the point that the perspective is also depending on the architecture in which we communicate, like the social perspectives. I mean, maybe the personal perspectives do not depend as so much on other things, but the social perspectives, so the social norms, we could say, are influenced by the communication media, in the sense that if it's a centralized communication media, then maybe certain attitudes such as cooperation or something like that might be less easily prone, that they will happen less frequently. Whereas in a if we communicate and if we move around our society through decentralized networks, it might be the case that it becomes more natural, more frequent to have all these sustainable solutions coming out. If we live in a world of centralized networks, like sustainable solutions might never emerge because the media doesn't allow for it. I see as a sort of, the Ising model in physics, where you have different like ferromagnetic elements. If you apply the magnetic field, then the material will become magnetized, and different materials might require different temperatures and different intensity of the magnetic field to become magnetized. So I think that Olivier is making a sort of similar an analogy of that, I would say, without maybe explicitly talking about it, but saying that the
Yeah, we lost you again.
Oh.
Yeah. Maybe he's traveling, or I don't know. Now he's muted.
It's just because of the material. It's not because there are electrons and protons there. It's because the way in which they are
Oh my God.
electrons, and then we will be forming atoms, which depend on the kind of network we are structuring. Oh yeah, serious people passing by. So
Maybe you should
yeah,
change the
I don't know if you
statement
see
one
the
phrase.
analogy, but we need to discuss further on that.
Yeah.
I will
Somebody has to tell him.
Tell him, May.
I don't think he's listening. So, but
He's like on the subway or something.
maybe.
Yeah.
Thomas.
I agree though. I mean, everyone else kind of get the gist of what's going on. All right, yeah. I mean, I think it's like only reason it took so long is just because
if you could explain the dynamic Platonism to the group, so the new idea that became.
Thomas, you were on and off,
Yeah.
so we don't know what you were.
We
talking
didn't
about.
understand.
Yeah.
But I heard dynamic Platonism at the end. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thomas.
That's okay. Yeah. All right. I mean, generally speaking, the only reason I wanted to like talk about that a little bit is because I had food poisoning last week, so I couldn't make the meeting. So, yeah, sort of. Probably move on to the next thing anyway, because I think it's time to. Cool.
But I have, Matthew, I have one idea on my mind concerning the perspective theme.
Of course.
I wonder, or I think that there are two levels. The way Thomas described the hidden power of the media, I would say one level is the content, which is provided, and the other level is the technical infrastructure which influences us. So I'm not sure if you have both levels on your mind to look at it, or
yeah, that's a really good question too, because they both embed or smuggle in like a certain perspective.
Yeah,
like Uber, like the technological infrastructure of Uber, the way it's set up as an organization, is set up in a way that's, I mean, just to think of Mark's presentation last week, right? Like these self-organizing groups or networks or even companies have a certain dynamic or process. And this is where like the notion of perspective gets tricky for me, because I would probably consider that like structure and process as a perspective. I think it like smuggles in a certain perspective or view of the world and like way the world works. So you have that first, like with the infrastructure itself, or even the relationships within and around the company, and then the content too. Like the content as well, like smuggles in a perspective. I mean, one of the things that I was just thinking about with content, you could take like the U.S. presidential election that's coming up. They're all like smuggling in a certain perspective of how the world works, which is like not a good, you know what I mean? It's not really like a, it's pretty, it's not so great, I guess we can say. But it's almost like anything, any kind of infrastructure or any kind of content implies perspective. Like it necessarily implies perspective. Like that's kind of how it feels, right? Yeah, define right.
Yeah. So perspective seems to be a metaphor.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So it's a visual, as Thomas is writing, it's a visual metaphor. We can talk about the way how we, or what you said, what our model of the world is.
Right. Like it could be a model, right? Like it is kind of like a metaphor, sort of.
Yeah.
Right.
I see
Yeah,
Pedro wants.
Pedro, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was thinking it's a little comment because it's like seeing because you were talking, Matthew, about perspective and modeling, no? And I was thinking in the way of physics do modeling about reality, no? Because if we remember, for example, when the quantum theory was established, one of the problems is that, wasn't a problem, but Einstein never realized that theory like a model that will predict reality as it is, like quantum physics. He never believed in that, like Pearson and other guys also, no? But one thing that I wanted to ask maybe, and how do you see it in your paper, is actually physics has this way to resemble the limits of the different models. Like if my model will predict this part of reality, let's say, I don't know, mechanical physics, and then they converge in some way that where they agree, no? So like when my model finish, the other model can begin, no? So like how do you see this, like in the perspective way, how you can resemble like the different perspective in a wider world view?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure if you could repeat that point about like where one model ends, the other begins. Could you just like talk about that a
Yeah.
little?
For example, if there is for example, in quantum mechanics, you have like there is a limit where you make a particle get bigger, and then you can resemble the classic mechanics, no? And for
Right.
example, in real,
Yeah.
I don't know, in quantum relativity, that you can do something like similar. And always in physics, you have like when you establish limits where you have the boundaries from one model to the other, they like glue together to say something, no? But yeah, more that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. So basically, how two different models kind of come together at a certain point, or kind of point to a similar process, kind of like build off each other. The reason I think that's like a really interesting point, and as far as this goes too, like what I was saying before about and we haven't done this yet, and I really want to see how Olivier responds to this. But like seeing a perspective as a kind of model, like it is a model, but it's like not really a model in the sense like that it's a static thing. It's like it's more like a living model. Like it's something it's like you can never really predict the future fully. But a perspective might be a way to have a model of the world, like I have a perspective of like my daily routine or something, for example, like a model of like how the world should go. And it's kind of like a living model. Like it's sure that you kind of model certain things, but it's normally like we model like physical things that are more like static, like here's modeling like the water flow in like this certain like ecosystem, for example. And of course, even that's not going to be like entirely accurate. But a perspective might be something like that is a model of the world, but is also like kind of more dynamic and like living, I guess. And I think it's like we have to try and make sense of like how that makes sense, how like it can be like a model of something, but it also kind of it's not like a static model, it's like a dynamic model. And that's kind of where like I think perspective gets difficult to kind of wrap our heads around. I mean, I don't really know how to fully think about it in those terms, or like fully make sense of it in that sense, because it seems like in order to have a perspective at all, whatever, like you have to kind of see the world, basically. That's really like what Thomas said before, like a perspective is just seeing the world. So yeah, it's like seeing the world, but I don't know, how do we kind of like make sense of that more, I guess, is kind of like difficult within like how does a socio-technical system see the world, kind of, because it kind of does, right? Like to some degree, at least that's what I would suggest. I mean,
I ask it this because I was thinking about actually this same topic that you were saying, and if you can like make to glue the different perspectives, you can have a wider worldview. I think no, that's because I ask. So maybe if you can like see where the limits of the you can join the perspective. No, you can have a wider perspective. No?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. That's actually like I actually have like a much simpler, easier answer to that question. It's called perspectival realism, I think it's called. Let's see. Perspectival realism. Yeah, I think Mark is here. I'm not 100% sure. I think he said his connection was a little bad, but he wrote this paper with. Oh, there he is. Hey, Mark. He helped write this paper and talked about it a little bit last time on perspectival realism. But this one is like as it relates to science, kind of. But I mean, I would say. I mean, I think it was like a great paper. If you want to talk about that real quick, Mark, I think that might be nice.
Well, I think I would recommend because it's a super fascinating topic. I definitely would recommend. I don't see Yogi today. He was there last time. He's really the specialist on perspectival realism. I think it's one of the three pillars he mentioned. So I would definitely on discussion on perspectives. I would definitely try to see if he could. Make a few slides or talk on that because I don't have all the references he used for that. I have some more. There's a lot of work in cognitive science on the concept of framings and framings of framings, which is another way that people also talk about this thing. But yeah, I think I would rely on Yogi for that.
Yeah, it was a really nice paper. We should have a meeting maybe in like soon that just goes over this paper. Hopefully Yogi would be up to do it, but I think if we dedicated a meeting to that paper, I think it would be a good idea.
What paper is it, Matthew?
I sent it over earlier. I mean, I could give like a brief outline.
Okay, that's one. Okay.
Mark brought it up in his last presentation.
Okay.
Basically, well, there's this one diagram that kind of outlines it pretty nice. Yeah, these are the three like pillars. I mean, it has to do with science and like how to do science differently, I guess. Yeah, and the thing about perspectival, it's kind of a tongue twister, right? Perspectival realism is like it doesn't. I found this kind of fascinating, and I mean, also true, but it doesn't really have any space for like objective scientific truth, or it kind of undermines the notion that there's like objective scientific truth. Of course, there like is to some degree. But I really liked how it emphasizes like in the scientific process, you have different perspectives which kind of come together to make. Here's a good sentence. Thus, multiple perspectives enhance robust. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, as true as it will ever get. So I mean, science being like a process that incorporates different perspectives, I think is a really good idea.
But I think your question is interesting on the integration aspect, which is like, how does a system built on multiple perspectives begin to have its own perspective? Like when you talk about the social technical system, which I think is interesting in the terms of, I guess, having its own like maybe as part of the collective agencies to begin to have something unified as an actual perspective, as a way to see the world and to frame. And so that aspect of integration of perspectives is something you see more in the questions of people that are in integral theory and try to look at the emergence of levels of selves that begin to have this one perspective. And that's something that actually I am interested in, but I don't know what like I saw that there was chat from Thomas saying, like, when he was perturbed, that some network aspect might be like some configuration of networks might be related to the way these are integrated into one way to see, or into at least a dialectic of ways to see. And I thought that was an interesting questioning, for example, like how the structure allows or not to have these multiple perspectives resonate and unify or not.
I think that's like exactly the question we should be asking. Like, how does one system or one maybe like collective, one agency or intelligence, how does it integrate different perspectives or a variety of perspectives? And it seems like that's also probably like in the realm of, I guess, cognitive science too, because in a way, like, I mean, one way to think about it would be the brain makes like many models of if you say that a model and a perspective are to some degree related, you could say that cognitive science or the brain, or like the human brain makes many models of the world, has many perspectives of the world, like equating those two, but also kind of integrates them in a certain way. So like, how are those integrated? And I think that might be a good way to develop the paper too, actually. If there are different styles of perspective integration.
And I wonder if it has also to do with the fact of having a perspective on the fact that you have perspective. So the question of reflexivity, the knowledge that you actually have a frame, because like big companies are good at having a perspective when they have one. They adjust everything to that perspective in order to act, right? And that's how they're efficient as organization. And typically you would have that with religious frameworks, or with big cultural framework, where you adjust kind of to the value systems, that is kind of your perspective of the world. You adjust always to that axioms, right? To those axioms.
Amazing point. And with the socio-technical system, like a technical system by itself does not have reflexivity. A human has reflexivity. A socio-technical system to some degree has reflexivity that's started by like a human or like a collection of humans, I guess. So I think you could probably talk about the degree to which like a socio-technical organization, or whatever we want to call it, has reflexivity. Reflexivity, and also the ability to even I guess change itself, or like the ability to, through reflexivity, evolve or learn or kind of improve.
I think sorry.
Go ahead.
Please May.
Okay, I just wanted to add maybe the concept of play in this, because we're talking about networks of humans and we play, and so how does play relate in this reflexivity and in this perspective making when interacting with in distributed and decentralized networks, like whether that is relevant. And I have an example of, like, I'm seeing, for example, in a guitar concert, if it's going to be different, that the listener, if the listener knows music and is a musician of guitar or any other instrument, and if it is not, and they have different kinds of, they have had a different kind of exposure and openness to the information, that allows them to reflect back much more, and it's going to be a completely different experience, completely different experience. And so I think that's what I was also thinking when, like, I don't know how you will describe, I'm very interested in how it will be described as the, like, what is enough to have a perspective, you know? Because you can have like just a simple melody line, and for a musician, they're going to imagine a whole different world, you know, and it's going to be like very real, like the context that their brain even is doing is going to be completely different. So what is enough, and my perspective is going to be different. Even in art, like visual art as well, like certain points is going to be, what is enough for me to make a perspective, to say, aha, this is it, this, you know, because a perspective is a position. So what is enough for this to happen? That's Christian.
Yeah, it's great, because this is, I'm thinking it's when we talk about perspective. So my question is generally, in what terms do we talk about a problem? And if we decide to use the term perspective, then we are in a complete, I would say, set of it's a metaphorical, it's a world, it's a world view, of course, when I think of this problem we are talking about as perspective or as framing, which drives us to completely different outcomes of research, I assume. Because when you think about perspective and you take it literally, perspective is connected to point of view. And then, of course, you can suddenly say, well, because of my point of view, because I'm standing here and looking from that angle to this building, I see this, as you said, this slice of reality. And so I have to move myself. I have to change my point of view to get to a different perspective. I can share my point of view with others. And you know what I mean? And suddenly you in a completely different description of the problem, or trying to grasp the problem. But this is crucial for me always.
Yeah.
In what metaphorical set, or what metaphorical set do we apply to a certain problem? And then, but of course, this is communication design question, you know. And if you do it, how far can you go, and how far the analogy then with such a metaphor helps, or even starts to hide, or to make it more unclear, you know.
Right.
This is really,
so many like things to pick up on here, and one of them is definitely, I mean, this distinction of like problems, and even maybe what you said about play too, is like you could even say one thing like where having a perspective, let's say you're in like a problem solving perspective, which is kind of what I was thinking about with that science paper too, and a lot of like the way humans work, or a lot of the way I guess system science is approached, is like solving problems. So like our way of relating to the world, or the perspective that we have of the world, is kind of one where there are problems that we solve. So, and like it's kind of like a fundamental part of what we do. It's like human cognition, or like whatever, like human processes are there to solve problems, which could be the case. I mean, like, of course, to some degree it is the case. We do solve problems, but is it always the case? I mean, I don't think so. Like, especially with what you said to May about play, it's like you can have a perspective where let's say we're doing research about like solving or like trying to solve a certain problem, and like you're suddenly in a world, and this is kind of why I brought up world building before too, because perspectives might even be viewed as a kind of like world building or like a world view, like you said, Christian, where like yeah, our perspective could be about solving problems, and if that like or there's a problem to be solved, and in that case our like I don't like our thought process would be geared towards solving problems because we have the perspective that there are problems to be solved. And that's just like one way to think about it. But I think you hit on so much too. I mean, there's so much more to say here. Yeah. A lot more to say. And real quick too, just May, what you said about like at what point do you recognize like good music kind of? I kind of like I have a friend who like some of my friends love to listen to jazz music. I have one friend who like completely hates it. Or he doesn't understand why we like it, I guess. So it's like, I mean, he's just like, this is the dumbest thing this is like just dumb. So to some degree, like, yeah, we have made a perspective about a certain world or about a certain process. And it's like, we do that in so many different ways. It's like, we could do it with jazz music, or we could do it with even with other music, but yeah, we could do it with painting. And in this case, it's not really it's not really directed towards solving a problem. It's just a perspective. Yeah, which might be categorized as play too, but it is like there are these kind of different world. I think it might be interesting to think about perspective in terms of world building too. Yeah, as I was saying before too.
I think, but interesting listening to all of you. It could perhaps also have the connotation, I think, that if you have enough perspectives, you can reconstruct the real thing. Because that's where it comes from geometry, actually. Yeah?
Hmm.
You project in a certain way, but if you have all the projections, you know actually what it really is. In that sense, it's a little bit more specific than worldviews, I think.
Hmm.
If you use the metaphor correctly, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Because if you have three perspectives of a physical object, then you can reconstruct the physical object in all its details.
Hmm.
But if you have only two, you miss one.
Right.
So in a certain way, perspective also means parts of the whole, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's what I like about perspectival realism too. It's like kind of takes that into account in the scientific process.
Yeah, and that's what also in science we do.
Yes,
you have more perspectives, you have a better view.
Mm-hmm.
You can see an evaluation there. You can see a growing of a better model.
To kind of flip that question around as well, as you could, and to relate it even to a person or to a socio-technical system like we were talking about before. It's like how many, or it might be interesting to consider how many different perspectives of other things is required in order to kind of have a more complex perspective emerge, in if that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the problems, for example, can be formulated one of the problems of quantum physics, for example, that physicists struggle with, is that even if you have three perspectives of a quantum particle, you cannot reconstruct it.
Mm.
It would be like, for example, in one perspective you would see a cylinder, in another perspective you would see a ball, and in a fourth perspective you would see a cube. Then you're stuck. You cannot reconstruct anything that would fit that. And this has been explored. There you have some drawings like that. Christian certainly must know them, I think, where you look in a certain way and then you see something. Well, Escher was famous. The artist Escher was famous to make come things into existing where every perspective would give you the impression, okay, yeah, I know a little bit what it is, but then they would contradict each other. There is this bridge that goes up or down, depending how you look at it. So Escher was actually playing with these things. And that fits perhaps what Matthew was saying already. Even if you have all the perspectives might contradict each other towards the hypothesis of what you think you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too. Like that always happens in people, or like there's a uniquely human perspective, I guess, which like is kind of I wouldn't say always wrong, but it's not necessarily entirely accurate. But it's like we do have models, and I mean, I really think it's interesting to think about how a perspective is a model or isn't a model. Because, I mean, to some degree, like let's just say you're looking at that one object. So from one perspective, you might say you have a model, you have a mental model or whatever, you're perceiving it. You have a model that it is a circle, I guess, like might be one way to put it. And that's like, it could be a bit of a stretch to say that your perception of something is a model, but I think it makes sense to make that stretch because it kind of is a model in a certain way. And then from another angle, you have a model where it looks different. And then the other angle, it's a model where it looks different. So, I mean, perspectives, and it's, so yeah, I would say perspectives like are models, but I don't really know how to fully understand how they're models that are also kind of like dynamic processes at the same time too. Or models, or just understanding perspectives as models, I guess, is kind of like a challenge. It seems like it's a challenge.
But one perspective is only a piece, huh?
Yeah.
The name, I think. One perspective would not be a model, I think. Well, you
wouldn't say so.
Of course, also, but a model at least tries to have different perspectives, I think.
Right.
Because you want to model the phenomenon, not one perspective of it.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, maybe. But if I want to come up, yeah.
I don't know, maybe I can make a metaphor here, but often this cylinder is used where you can sit in front of it and you see a circle, you can sit on the side of it and you see a rectangle, and the perspective is where you are facing that. And you can make a model of it. You can say, well, it's best explained by a disc or whatever, or best explained by a rectangle.
Yeah.
And I think the sense making, or like the there's this ability to reframe yourself, which is to know that you are in a perspective and to walk perspectives, which would be kind of transdisciplinary work and all these things. So it's kind of one step back of observing yourself, observing through a lens, right? And so perspectival realism would be the fact that both these perspectives are true, but there's something more true, which is that you could kind of navigate and see those through different lenses, right?
Yeah, perspective contains the hope that there is more. Huh? Perspective. And also the awareness, the humble awareness that it's only in a perspective that you see.
Yeah, and I think that perspective. What I tried to point out is that perspective is the outcome of your point of view, literally where you are standing,
right,
in relation to the object that you're looking at,
right.
And suddenly you get all these things going that you can share your point of view with somebody else, and that you can change the point of view, and that there are obstacles in the way, and that you have to decide in which direction do I want to go, and all these questions suddenly come in.
Great. I know. Yeah, what Mark and you just said, Christian, are perfect too, because then perspectives are all different points of view, and a socio-technical system, for example, is able to incorporate many different perspectives or incorporate many different points of view. And I guess it depends how it does this, but it can do this, but the fact that it does that, it to some degree maybe creates a new perspective. But really the thing that I just want to say is that it can incorporate these different perspectives, and whatever it does, I think that's another conversation, but I think that's an interesting point of view, is like a really good way to consider these questions.
Yeah, one wording that has been used in cognitive science for the perspectival process is a relevance realization, which is a process of emergence of what they call a salience landscape, which is what are the graspable objects to which I have a certain relation. So for a company, it might be other firms, and there's a very specific relation. So you will have a huge salience landscape to that, but not to anything else that for us is a salience landscape. So there's this aspect of what is a relational embodiment of, right? And so I think that's kind of this in companies or in organizations, this emergence of a salience landscape, I think initially tend to be mostly in what they would call the distributed cognition of the system, which is basically we begin to in our brains, but we talk about it, and at some point is encoded into kind of white paper or something like that begins to encode what the perspective is actually, what the stance is.
The fact that you brought that up too is kind of another way to look at it, is like graspable objects. Like for a company has a certain perspective for like certain processes that it does. So you could also think of perspective as like, what are the potential processes? And one might even want to frame it in condition action rules as well, but just generally speaking, like, what are the many processes that a perspective kind of can give rise to? Or like for a person, the perspective of a person kind of allows to be a part of processes like I can go down, like I can go in my fridge and eat food, for example. Like that process is possible. Or I can like talk to my friends or do this or do this. The perspective of a squirrel is a little bit different. The processes that it can take part of, or maybe even like its condition action rules, would be okay. Like how do I climb up this tree or something? But different processes kind of are a key part of perspective, I think.
Yeah, that's a very von Uexküll way to see the world. I don't know if you know the von Uexküll. He was working on animal worlds. He was describing what it is to see as a tick, going on the fur, and that your world is basically a few parameters, that is heat, presence of hair, etc. And so there's this kind of plurality of what you can be with respect to the relation you have. And so that's what's bringing it back down to actually what's the model of the world, and that's kind of some nonlinear function of like, I attach to something if the heat is above 37 Celsius or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's actually a model, right? And then you can actually have decision tree, right?
Yeah. Right. No, that's a great point.
Mark, can I ask, what was the term you said, the cognitive term, relational landscape? No, it was not relational.
So there's a salience landscape. So salience is like, basically you have a hierarchy of values in things you see, right? So you in a sense that you will see some colors, or you will see, so you kind of have things that attract you more, and so that's the salience in the landscape.
Okay.
And salience is basically allows to offer affordances. So then from this salience, you have perception action. You perceive the salience, and you kind of can act on it through affordances, and then you can grasp. So it's this whole perception action loop that people kind of describe in cognitive science, which I think is reasonable here to involve for these collective systems.
Yeah, this is a great point.
It's really connected to agency as well. Is my screen still can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this was, I actually wasn't going to talk about this today, really. I think I sent this a while ago. But in terms of perspectives, it might be interesting to think about this model right here, because your perspective also, like what objects can I grasp, or like what can I do like in this situation. It's kind of like how we sense the world, or the way in which we are sensitive to the world, like the kind of infrastructure, or kind of like the stuff of sensitivity, kind of our perspective. So like like you said before about like a certain tick, like if it senses that it's going to be like a certain temperature, it's going to like do this. Or like if I sense that it's like way too hot outside too, like I'll just take a cold shower or something. But sensitivity, and I guess, but sensitivity is really related, I think, to perspective, or like the two can be kind of thought about together, like in the same terms.
Yeah, maybe sensitivity landscape or something like that.
Yeah, maybe. Or and like salience too, like you mentioned, it's kind of like what is salient, kind, or like what's important. And like for a company, for example, like a company is, or like a platform, or like a socio-technical system, to some degree is sensitive, I guess, or it has that like perspective, because it's sensing maybe cultural shifts, or it's sensing like economic trends or something. And it's like and that's like the world to the socio-technical system. And like there, like you were saying before about that tick, there's this quote that I used to kind of think about a lot. Something like, to a worm and a horseradish, like the world is horseradish. So it's like whatever you're sensing, whatever your perspective is, it's like that's your world, and kind of things are organized like from there. And like it might even be one entry point to consider to agency, in that sense, like agency kind of arising through perspective.
Well, I guess it's a bit more because you could say an electron has perspective of the world because it has a salience landscape of things it's interacting with, or
I would
dark matter
agree.
has another one, right?
Yeah.
But what I think agency adds up is some felt sense, at least, that there is a process, an active process, an active inference process. Actually, I would go back to the terminology of Freestone of that because he uses a lot of this kind of active inference and predictive processing aspects. So we talked a lot about modeling the world and then acting. So agency is really about that acting loop, while salience is about kind of what the landscape of possible interaction is. And it seems that agency is about the act where you kind of actively grasp or actively act. I don't know, actively change actually in a way that's that landscape.
Yeah, what's that guy's name? Because I think this is really
Freestone. Carl Freestone. I just read a paper from him yesterday, so I can share.
Yeah, that would be
great.
great.
It's pretty decent.
Nice.
He's like the most cited neuroscientist. Not too bad.
Okay, yeah, nice. Yeah, it's either really good or really bad. Let's hope it's really. Let's hope it's really good. It sounds really good so far.
Yeah, actually, that's a very nice paper, by the way, written, I guess, by one of his PhD students or postdoc, which is the question of nested cells. So they consider what is it to have pregnancy, because pregnancy, you have a self-organizing system in a self-organizing system, and so they ask that in the context of the active inference. I will send that because it might be good as a kind of cognitive science-y world.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny. There was a class seminar like a while ago, and one of the ladies, or like the lady that did it, she like won a award for one of her papers like on pregnancy, and like how it like basically the same topic, which is pretty interesting actually. The way it is, yeah, it is like a self-organizing system inside a self-organizing system. Yeah, but I do think that this kind of link is really important. Like the link from salience to modeling more of the world, and then from that agency kind of. I think agency really comes about through like somewhere in that gray area of like the example of the electron is like perfect. Because an electron does have a perspective. It's like I think it's like I'd probably say that like it has a perspective, and it has salience. It has like certain condition action rules, even which aren't necessarily. I don't know exactly how an electron works, but I don't think they're always necessarily mechanistic and set in stone. I think there's like some randomness. So
yeah, I think people would begin, at least in cognitive science, would start the differentiation with the fact of having an internal model of the world, and then having a learning aspect of refining that model.
Yeah, that's
right. And that would be probably the difference between perspective and agent, where perspective would be kind of a static agent, one that doesn't refine its model. All right, so there's something about the process aspect,
right?
Yes, of adjustment, of the relational adjustment.
Right. Yeah, that's perfect. That's literally an internal model which like allows for learning, kind of, or something like that. I mean, are there any papers? Do you know that kind of?
Well, I was going to share. There's this kind of in the meditation world. There's this guy who's becoming a bit viral because he comes from kind of predictive processing and neural networks, and he's describing the act of meditation, which is kind of reframing and seeing the kind of lenses for which you see the world, using Bayesian analysis and trying to kind of use Bayesian brain to model perspective. So I was going to share that YouTube video, which is a very nice primer for that.
Yeah, totally. It's funny how like a lot of or it's like kind of difficult to find a lot of people like that are like very trustworthy or kind of innovative or kind of saying interesting things. But I you know what I loved is the paper that you sent on wisdom. I thought like I that was amazing. That was like a really nice perspective. I mean, that was. I mean, I know the 4 different kinds of knowing. I mean, I think they know what they're talking about. Kind of. That was great.
Dear sympathizers, I have to leave because in 15 minutes we have another meeting with the Diamond Group. And before I have to refresh myself a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to head out too.
Yeah.
But another great session.
Yeah. Good stuff. Maybe next week Francis is going to join.
In 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, right?
Right.
Yeah, on the 28th.
Right. We'll talk about agency then,
Yes.
Probably. But I do think perspective is like maybe what we should be focusing on. I don't know. We'll see.
It was great.
But yeah, I guess see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah. See you tonight, maybe some of you at the Metamodern Emergentism talk. Yeah, Graham Dempsey.
What is
real quick too?
Can you send a? Okay. Is this the link?
Yeah. It's also in the email, but it's.
Okay. Great.
It's kind of following Verveke is kind of the adjacent to that tribe of like the awakening from the meaning crisis tribe, but he's trying to found emergentism as a religion that is not a religion.
That's great. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Yeah, see you soon.
Okay. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. See you.
See you guys.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
I also have to leave, guys.
See you.
You continue.
Yeah, we shall continue.
Time. Very interesting.
Gabriel, did you record the meeting? Because it says recording in progress. I just want to make sure.
Yes.
We got. Okay. Cool. And you know how to save it and everything?
Yeah. I put in the folder of the drive.
Perfect.